Hey everyone, if you haven't been keeping up with Dark and Darker for announcements, today we're going to go through all of the new features, or lack of features, coming in the next playtest on April 14th, which is only a few weeks away at this point. Now we've learned from recent interviews and Q&As with Iron Mace that there are going to be some huge changes coming in the next playtest, so let's dive right in and discuss them. One of the perhaps biggest announcements is the potential release of a new class for the next playtest, and for all of you taunters out there, you're going to be very happy because that is the Bard. For those of you who have not played Dungeons and Dragons or just aren't all that familiar with what a Bard brings to the table, I'll give you a quick idea of what that might look like. Bards are masters of song, speech, and the magic which they contain. The greatest strength of a Bard is their versatility, however, most of them like to stick to the sidelines in combat, using their magic to inspire their allies and hinder their foes from a distance. But, much like a cleric, they can buff themselves, making them still a formidable foe in close encounters, and also viable for solo. Now, if this doesn't sound cool enough, you're going to have a playable instrument too, which you can cast your magic through. Now, I don't know if it's going to make me laugh or cry yet, but we'll have to soon find out. I just hope it doesn't end up like Mordhau. In terms of what this magic will look like, it's probably going to be buffs to movement speed, damage, and maybe even some healing too. For offensive magic, I'd love to see a bard insulting me with vicious mockery from across the room with VoIP, but I have a feeling that's not going to happen for the foreseeable future. So I'll settle for debuffs that perhaps blind or deafen, illusions for trickery, and maybe even disables. Now they have said it will depend on whether or not they have its functionality ready in time for the next test, but knowing Iron Mace and how quickly they turned around the Goblin Caves expansion, following the want from its fans for a solo dungeon, there's a very high likelihood we're actually going to see it. Aside from new characters, there's going to be some new additions to both the dungeons and monsters, as well as loot changes and hints as to how the game is going to function on release. So let's start with the dungeons. For those of you who don't know this, the main dungeon we've had access to is actually level 2 of a 3-tiered dungeon. These tiers are marked by their difficulty and loot value, with 3 being the most dangerous with the highest reward. However, Iron Mace have told us that the first dungeon, level 1, which is called Rune, will be released in the next playtest. So we're going to start in the Rune, and then work our way to the second dungeon that we're used to, and then finally the Inferno dungeon deep down underground. As far as what we know about Rune, the devs have said that they would like it to be a surface level where players would be able to look up and actually see the sky. Now, from concept art pulled from the development program, we can actually see visually the idea that Iron Mace has for Rune. It seems it's going to be a destroyed castle or keep deep within a dense and magical forest, and perhaps even having areas which are completely outdoors, which would be super cool. An interesting question raised within one of the recent Q&As was whether or not drop rates for healing items and campfires would be increased for level 1 of the dungeon, thus allowing players to feel more confident going deeper after surviving. However, they said it was still under development and they weren't 100% sure if they're actually going to make adjustments to drop rates for healing items. But hey, that's what playtesting is for, and that's what we're here to test. One of the main concerns that I personally have, which was actually raised in one of the discussions, was inventory space in a 3-tiered dungeon format. I felt it really didn't take much time to completely fill my inventory up in the previous playtests just from one floor of the dungeon. However, if they intend to encourage a full dungeon dive, they're going to have to add equipment like small backpacks to expand inventory space, and that could be a very interesting idea and very effective remedy, and they seem to already have that in mind for future changes, which is excellent. Alright, now that we've covered the 2 biggest changes coming in the next test, let's talk about some of these smaller, but by no means less impactful changes, and also some of the things we've been hoping for, but won't be available for testing. A lot of players have been dying with anticipation with regard to the questing system, which is soon to be implemented into Dark and Darker, as it's going to completely flesh out the game in a very magnificent way. However, it does seem that from discussions with Iron Mace, the quests are very likely not going to be in the upcoming playtest, but more towards the early access launch of the game. It's perfectly understandable that it's taking time, as it will be one of the biggest upcoming changes to how the game plays out, and is likely going to provide a major part of the game's content for players. There were also discussions regarding matchmaking, groups, and the party system. In terms of streamlining the player experience, they have stated that they have a plan for some sort of party system. Whether or not this is going to be directly integrated through Steam, which I would personally opt for, or be more of an in-house system, we're currently unsure, but they have stated it's of a lower priority at the moment, and thus we won't likely see this in the next test. Iron Mace have also stated that they don't have any plans for duos maps, or a party PvE mode for players to experiment and play alone with their friends. However, they are working on plans to increase team size for bigger maps and bigger bosses in the future. So, we could see full parties of as much as 5 players diving into huge dungeons in the future. It seems they do however plan on introducing some changes to the party finder, perhaps adding different lobbies for players to look for normal dungeon lobbies or high rollers so that people know what they're queuing for when they actually join others. It was a bit of a problem sometimes joining random groups and then expecting a certain queue and then being queued for the other dungeon. So hopefully that'll fix it. In terms of skills, classes and races, we're going to be seeing some big changes too. The devs have spoken about races previously and suggested they do want to introduce more fantasy races to the game. However, with that will come various challenges, and using the example of dwarves, it's understandable that having a tiny barbarian dwarf running around your waist with a felling axe might introduce some balance issues. But it's something they want to try and most likely will, but not in the immediate future. They've also spoken on various class changes for the upcoming playtest, and it's important to know that we will not be seeing the talent tree just yet. However, there are a lot of smaller changes which are going to refine and tweak a lot of the classes. Starting with Rogue, we're going to be seeing some fun features introduced in the coming months, and likely some more balancing. One of which was mentioned was having the ability to continuously pickpocket whilst moving and invisible, which does sound like a lot of fun. They've also said that they would like to introduce various poisons usable by the rogue to inflict different debuffs, which does sound super interesting and adds a little bit more customization to your build. Fighter is also being reworked with new perks and skills, which I'm personally super stoked about considering I'm a fighter main. And Ranger is going to have an actual quiver with arrows it seems, so no more pulling infinite arrows out from the most unholy of places. Barbarian they've been super vague about, but it seems that they will receive some minor tweaks to some of their skills and damages. And Wizard is going to be seeing some buffs to downtime in terms of having to meditate too often to replenish themselves, and also some smaller tweaks to their overall spells. And now lastly, for all of you loot goblins and weapon enthusiasts out there, there's some nice changes coming. One of the biggest changes coming, which they haven't elaborated on fully, is that they're going to be changing the pace of drop rarity for the next playtest. Now, speaking from experience, I'd say they're likely going to be significantly nerfing the drop rate of higher tier loot below unique, as they were a little too common in all of the dungeons. As far as unique weapons go, the devs are pretty satisfied with how powerful and fun they were, so there likely will be absolutely no changes to them in the upcoming test. However, they will be adding more weapons, one of which has already been revealed, and that is the one-handed crossbow. Unfortunately though, for all of you weebs out there, they have indicated that there are no plans to add katanas to the game as of yet. Well, that pretty much sums up most of the cool and important changes coming to the game in the next month. I'm sure you're all as excited as I am about all of this, and it won't be long till we're back in the dark and dusty dungeons of Dark and Darker. Hope you enjoyed the video guys. If you did, like and subscribe goes a long way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.